Okay, please be seated. Okay, I'll get Mr. Hulsey, I think was the issue. So let's go ahead and get Mr. Hulsey. We'll wait. Let's wait a couple minutes so that let him get set so he doesn't have to come right in and have the jury come right in on top of him.
A little bit.
Don't worry about it. It happens. We got a lot of moving parts. Okay, Mr. Hulsey's here. Any issues from anybody's perspective we need to talk about before we bring the jury back in?
No, thank you.
Reeves, anything from your
No,
perspective?
sir.
Mr. Martinez, I'm expecting, and let me check with Mr. Reeves, if Mr. Martinez finishes before the next planned break, which I expect to happen, are you ready to go right into your closing argument? Okay, we don't need to take a break. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get the jury.
Always happens just once a try. Yeah, it always happens.
Please be seated, everyone. Let the record reflect the presence of the jury panel, defendant, and counsel. Okay, now we're ready. Sorry about that. I had forgotten that I had promised to talk to them before we were going to start, but now we're ready to go. We left off with the state's closing argument, so that's where we will pick up. Mr. Martinez, you may continue.
Before us, we were talking about this bastion of scientific ingenuity known as ShotSpotter, and we left talking about its shortcomings. One of the other shortcomings that ShotSpotter has is this issue gun. And again, when do we hear the 11th? When do we hear the shot from Bryan's gun? It is the 11th shot. This is part of the scientific, objective evidence that will help you decide the merits of the case on the facts. If you can't even distinguish between a 357 and a 40 caliber, how can you possibly say which is the 11th shot? The only place that you can say it's the 11th shot is in this Neverland, this created world that they want you to go into. Because according to their own expert, this system on that date was limited even to the point that it was an absolute hindrance rather than a help. It would have sent the officer somewhere else. The dispatcher thought it was firecrackers. Rather than dealing with the killing, they're dealing with a firecracker instead. It was a hindrance, and there's no way that anybody can tell you which shots are the defendants and which shots are Officer Brady's. Their own expert admitted that. So this system that is being held out as scientific objective evidence really is nothing more than a hindrance in this case. Because if you look at what it really produced in this case, it produced a different location. It would have sent officers somewhere else. The other thing that is important about this system and that we have to consider at this point is this issue involving the time. And I've already talked about the problem with the time, and this is exhibit number 362. I want to talk to you about this in a different sort of vein. And it has to do with the candor of the witness when discussing this particular system. Throughout this whole endeavor, when he was, and I'm talking about Paul Green, when he was testifying, every time, even questions from the jury, he would go on and on and on, not trying to answer questions. He would answer everything under the sun when he was being asked a question. That person you saw was never at a loss for words when he was being asked a question, whether it was from the defense counsel, whether it was from you. He went on and on. But when he was being questioned about the time, you saw his eyes when he saw that. Did he ever, this verbose individual that couldn't stop himself from talking, as I told you before, or you remember, he wanted to talk about his vacation. This person did not have the candor to say to you, no, oops, I'm wrong. That's another example of how my machine doesn't work. Well, actually, that's another example of this machine that's broken but doesn't work further. Why didn't he do that? He was on the witness stand. You saw how much he volunteered. And that shows you, not only is the system something that you can't rely on, it's not scientific, but the person, the messenger, is somebody that you really can't trust as you sit here. The credibility of witnesses' instruction has been read to you. And it talks about the manner the person talks, what other evidence is there. That individual talked on and on ad nauseum. But when it came to this, he was quiet as a church mouse. He's standing there. No word. And perhaps people began to believe this Neverland. No one asked about it. And what did he do? Well, he swallowed it. He just sat there, quiet as a church mouse, didn't address this. Because, again, that's another limitation on his testimony. What he should have done and what he did throughout his whole presentation was continually taught. And we would have known that this was wrong, too. This is 8 hours after 7 o'clock. 7 is 9:15. This is military time. And the reason that I know that it's military time, and that you know it's military time, is if you take a look at the other exhibits that are involved in this particular case. Exhibit 378. See the time there? 07/29/20. So it isn't like even in 2014. It isn't like the system that he was running, the program, whatever he was running, doesn't recognize a 7. It did recognize a 7. But then he comes in with this. It doesn't really have anything to do with this. If you look at it that way, how is it that the system can tell you in 378 that it's 7:29 in the morning? 0700, that's 7 in the morning. How can it tell you that? But yet, when he's going to do his mathematical calculations and going to tell you how many hundredths of a second are between each shot, he comes up with a different time. Same machine, isn't it? There's no indication anywhere that anything was changed with that machine. There's no indication that the operator was in there changing the times. How comfortable are you that are you in the times? There is something drastically wrong with that machine that they're holding up for you like this golden beacon for you to aspire and rise to. They're holding that out to you, but that machine on 2 different occasions, at different times, and even in 2014, it can tell the difference between 7 o'clock in the morning and 3 o'clock in the afternoon. All that? Is that really scientific, objective evidence? Or are you going to speculate, which you're told not to do, and say, you know what? He was such a nice guy. He wanted to tell us about his vacation. Let's give him a break and say, heck, it's only 8 hours. What's the big deal? That's a work day for most people. Maybe it was a work day. Or maybe, as he inputted that it was gunshots, maybe somebody inputted that time. We don't know, but it's certainly different. And if you take a look at the other items that you have there, when we talk about the dispatcher times, let's take a look at those. You will see that the dispatcher is able to keep time. Exhibit number 361. See that? This is the one we told you. See the time? 7:29 in the morning. Glendale Police Department didn't have any trouble telling time. And the only thing that's showing up there is that somebody on April 8th of 2014 is trying to label that as gunshots. Fingerprint of somebody trying to change something here. And that's what they want you to believe is scientific evidence. Not what it is. It is a failed system being used to take you to this area where the facts are not considered and don't matter. Only the word of somebody is what they want you to consider. They want you to have faith in that word and ignore all of these other things. Some of the other scientific evidence that they brought for you involved ballistics. And one of the terms that that individual used was magical. Said something about the bullets not having these magical qualities. If you remember, Don Quixote and Sancho had many adventures, but one of them that talks to this particular issue about the magic involves what everyone's probably familiar with and identifies with this particular story novel. And it involves the windmills. Early on, the pair going along and they see about 40 windmills. And Don Quixote, seeing the windmills, being eager to get into it, trying to do good deeds for Dulcinea del Toboso, begins to charge and says, those are monsters. Those are monsters, and I must slay the monsters, which is akin to what I guess they're trying to tell you here. And he starts charging down, and Sancho comes up on that donkey, following behind, saying, no, those are windmills. And Don Quixote goes down, and as the leaves are turning, he sticks his lance in one of them, the lance breaks, he goes up a little bit, he comes down on his horse, and he are hurt. So when Sancho finally reaches him and says, why did you do that? Why is it that you did that? He said, Sancho, it's magic. Something like Jacko Swanapa was talking to you about. They want you to believe in magic. And Don Quixote said, these actually were monsters. But the necromancers, or the magicians, changed them into windmills to take away my glory. But you have to see that it's actually the magic that they, just like Jacko Swanapa talked about, magic. And that ballistics is not a science of magic. That bullets, once in flight, will fly true until gravity brings them down and until the wind stops them. That's what he was telling you. Except that you also heard statements like this that were debunked by their own expert, Jacko Swanapa. You were told, in an opening statement, I told you that Officer Gloria was in a complete panic. And that's shown by the wild pattern of his shots as he's shooting. 2 of his shots hit the car. 1 of his shots hits the house. 2 of his shots hit trailers down here. 3 to 4 blocks away. Really? That what the evidence is shown in this case? Not the speculation, not the word of somebody. I was told for you in the beginning. So perhaps you could get on the train and get to their destination. That's what you were told. But their own expert, when he saw the pattern, when he saw the strike on that trailer that was down the street, across 59th Avenue, past the empty lot, underneath the eaves, when he saw it, if you don't want to believe Detective John Bustos, don't believe him. Because he told you also, the reason I didn't investigate that is because that was angled. And he showed you that. It was impossible for it to have come from Officer Goya's gun. Well, they didn't believe him. They bring Jacko Swanapa, their expert, the guy that's an expert in reconstruction, a guy that charges money for it. That individual came in here, said, you know what? Gotta tell you, I'm not going to Neverland with you. I'm not going to this land of odd that you want me to go to. I don't want to go to this magic land. I'm telling you right now, he said, I haven't seen that photograph before. I wasn't asked to go there. Looking at that photograph, that is an angled shot that was north and south, not east and west, which is what required. Their own witness is telling you this is not magic. Their own witness is telling you that what is being presented or given to you to look at is really, really problematic. He didn't use that word, Jacko Swanapa, but he just said that was not a perpendicular shot, which would have been required for Officer Goydia to do that. Officer Goydia was not down 59th Avenue, north or south, for him to make that. It's going to happen. And when asked about the shot to the trailer behind that, the one that was hit in the east, he said, almost out of frustration, he said, you know, I keep telling you, bullets don't have these magic qualities. They fly straight, they hit something, then they angle off a little bit. But they don't go up over a trailer. They don't then continue that way, come down, and then continue. They just don't do that. But yet they told you in this two shots hit trailers down here 3 to 4 blocks away. Their own expert says no. Don't believe those statements. You don't want to believe the state's expert, or the state's detective, boom. Well, the other thing that they told you with regard to this was that the objective scientific evidence will show that the lone shot disregards that there are 4 casings in that gun by Bryan was fired while he had turned the corner and run down this direction, down the street, and then fired down into this direction as he lay on the ground, having been shot by Officer Goydia. Keep in mind that requires an individual to be something like this. Something like that. Remember, he was shot in the knee. That's what they're telling you. So that means that the shot that he has to fire at Officer Goydia is either, if it's straight, is going to be 2 to 3, what is it? Depending on how tall he is, 2, 3 feet off the ground. If it's going to be straight, isn't it? But other than that, if it's going to shoot up like that, it's going to be continuing up like that. And is it going to be down at the corner such that this shot that's going up, is then somehow going to make a 90-degree angled turn and then straight to the wall? Is that the way bullets fly? No, isn't the way. And this, of course, is dependent on your belief of shot spotter. How do we know? If we rely on shot spotter, how many shots were fired from a 357? It's just as likely that the 4 shots from a 357 are there as the shots from the .40 caliber. They can't tell you. That technology can't tell you anything. But that technology does tell you that you should corroborate your evidence with the witnesses. In this case, the witnesses, Patsy, one of them being Patsy Jones, said she saw and heard 4 shots, the same thing with Officer Goydia. So, and then you have 4 that are spent. And you come in with a system such as this, doesn't distinguish anything, who is broken, and then you are told this. How could you possibly believe anything like that? How could you possibly believe anything like that? What you can believe is what their expert tells you, that when a bullet strikes dead on like this, that's a perpendicular shot, which requires the muzzle uttered or sent out the bullet to be at a perpendicular angle, if that's the correct term, to the wall in this particular case. And he was not going to be swayed by that, from that. Oh yeah, maybe it hit the tree or whatever, but then if it hits the tree, it starts to tumble. And then it isn't going to hit down. So, one of the other things that Justice Howell was asked about was whether or not he had given an opinion that just because somebody, Officer Hawley, hadn't pulled their gun out, that he could say that Officer Hawley was standing there just watching, bending around while the officer was this over here. I said, no, I never gave that opinion. But yet, that was offered to you in court. This is what we were told, what you were told. What else will the objective and scientific evidence show you? The medical examiner will tell you that the bullet hit Officer Hawley, went in his right side, out his left side of the stance. The shot went in and out on an even plane. The conclusion is Officer Hawley was not ducking, not trying to get out of the way of the shot, but was hit unexpectedly as he stood watching Bryan run. Watch, spot, run. Yeah. Police officer, there's a gun out there. Shots have already been fired. Another officer's already running. Standing there. What an incompetent rube that officer was, right? Right? That's exactly what they're telling you. Exactly it. But when Shockley Swanfeld, their own expert, was asked about it, he said, no, that's not it at all. I never said that, and you can't tell that at all. Of course, in this created reality, yes, maybe, some of you might want to believe that that's true. But you're not allowed to speculate. The judge has already told you that. You are to decide the facts from the evidence that's presented, which is the testimony and the items that are introduced as evidence. There is nothing that was introduced that indicated that at all. It's nothing but speculation. Quite frankly, since he's not here to defend himself, it's a little bit harsh on that police officer, just a tad harsh. One of the things that this expert did tell you was that if the items had been recovered from the head of Officer Holly, that there may be an opportunity to tell which of the two guns fired that shot. But he never said that it was the .357, and he never said it was the .40 caliber gun that actually fired it. He never said that. He said he couldn't say that. And in fact, we talked a lot about the size of the items and how small they were, and that perhaps they could. But he also said that even larger items than that, much larger items than that, don't have any identifying characteristics, and the size doesn't really matter that much. It could be larger, and you still couldn't tell. But one of the things that he did tell you that was very important in this case is that he could tell you from his expertise that the .40 caliber bullet, the gold dot, the one that was being fired by Officer David Goya, is designed not to fragment. What he told you is that that jacket, the copper-looking thing around the lead, even though it's a hollow point, is bonded onto the lead. And it's bonded on in such a manner that when it goes and strikes somebody, it is not going to fragment. That's what it's designed to do. That's what the bullet is designed to do. On the other hand, the Independence round is not bonded like that. It's not bonded at all. And that one is also thinner in construction such that it does fragment when it does strike an individual. From that, certainly one of the conclusions that you can draw from their own expert is that all this big issue that you had about the fragments, based just on what he told you, is that fragments came from that .357. And one of the issues that arose is, what do you do with that evidence when something is not collected? And fortunately, in this case, you have guidance from the court as to how you consider it, because it would almost be unfair to send you back and say, wow, there's this issue with the fragment, without giving you guidance. And you indicated that you would follow the jury instructions, and it is your duty to do so. And the jury instructions tell you on page 7 how you consider that evidence and what you do with it. And it tells you that if you find that the state has lost, destroyed, or failed to preserve, it's a failed to preserve evidence, who's coming with a medical examiner. It isn't like he was trying to hide anything. What he told you is, in my experience, having done these thousands of autopsies, being involved in cases where there are fragments and there has been a shooting, I determined that because of the size, this was not important scientifically. It wasn't like he sat down with John Bustos, as they allege, and said, hey, let's get together and do something about that. And they did allege that there was some sort of collusion going on there. But it does say, weigh the explanation, if any. There is an explanation. He wanted to save the family the trauma of having to cut up this individual's face. That's what he said. Given for the loss or unavailability of the evidence. If you find that such explanation is inadequate, how adequate is that? You see, he was thinking of the family. It wasn't like he was colluding with that, with Officer John Bustos. Then you may draw an inference of favorable, unfavorable to the state. Only after you decide whether or not the explanation is adequate or inadequate are you then going to draw any inferences. And in this case, there is no unfavorable inference to be drawn to the state. There isn't, because what is the explanation? He sat up there and told you, hey, I didn't talk to the detective. Of course I didn't talk to the detective. I made that scientific decision myself. I'm the person that's responsible for that. And as I told you over and over, I didn't want to mangle the face. That's what he said. And I couldn't find the particles without doing it. It's important to note that you are to consider the defense and what they told you about that. They told you an opening statement. Officer Bustos, who was in charge of this case, attended the autopsy, and he told the medical examiner, that's John Booth, when the medical examiner asked, what do you want me to do with the small fragments? He said, leave them alone. Don't take them out. Is that what the evidence showed? Is that what the evidence showed? But they want you to believe that. And they want you to believe that because the instruction talks about whether or not an explanation is adequate. Certainly, it would have been inadequate for the officer to do that. He doesn't have any medical training. Just like Jocko Swanaco, he can't go on in there and say, do this, do that. That's beyond his expertise. And if it's beyond his expertise, then he shouldn't be telling them that. But the detective said, no, I have nothing to do with that. And the medical examiner said, I was the one that made that decision. So they turn around and they tell you this because they want to bootstrap onto that jury instruction. Again, they want to take you to this area, to this arena, to a place that ain't their own reality. They want to take you to a place that's not considerate of the facts in this case. They want you to consider their statements as if they were facts. They want you to consider their inaccuracies as if they were facts. And when they're right out into the sunlight, they want you to say, he says, that's okay. That's okay. No, it's not okay. The judge tells you, or at least the jury instructions tell you, that you are to decide this case from the facts that you determine. And the facts can only be determined from what comes from the witness stand in the form of testimony and in the form of any exhibits that are admitted, such as Exhibit 362. All the wrong times are. Oh, now you're allowed to ponder this. Are you going to go to this other land where being created in spite of what was presented in this court? Are you going to go to this land and not look at the evidence? Are you going to follow this illogical path? State requests that instead of following this illogical path, you follow the jury instructions. And once you do that, you return the verdicts. And those verdicts are first-degree murder, guilty verdict on that, the guilty verdict of attempted first-degree murder. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Why don't we clear out the exhibits for Reeves, so clear those out. Reeves, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just 1 second, Your Honor, I'm sorry.
Good afternoon. You know, one of the great things about being Don Quixote and Man of La Mancha is that there's an explanation for your writings. In Miguel de Cervantes, when he wrote Don Quixote, why did he write it? He'd been in prison for 7 years by his government wrongfully. He wrote it as a protest against his wrongful conviction. A very interesting analogy to use, and I appreciate it. Today I'm going to explain to you magic. Not that hard. But the great thing about magic is when you hear the explanation, suddenly you get it. Let's see, what time did the report come in to the police station? 7:29. The report. Of the spot